Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Today's topic is workers' compensation. We'll look at what that means, how workers' compensation works, and the recent reform and its effects on our businesses and economic development. Our guest is Steve Carbone from the Bureau of Compliance, and let's meet him and get started. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Pleasure being here.
Workers' compensation is probably not the most exciting topic that anybody could come up with.
Well, we'll try and make it as interesting as possible and probably give people little tidbits to chew on.
But it is an important one.
It's very critical.
Let's start with a little background. You're from the Bureau of Compliance. And how does that fit into the workers' compensation system, and how is it governed?
In terms of the Workers' Compensation Board, we basically have two major responsibilities, one of which is to adjudicate claims, basically finding out whether there's an employer-employee relationship, and also trying to find out what the average weekly wage is, et cetera, for somebody who's hurt on the job. The second major part of our responsibility is making sure that every employer that's supposed to have workers' comp actually obtains it. So that's the Workers' Compensation Board, but there are certainly other major players in the system, one of which is the Insurance Department. The Insurance Department has historically, their responsibility has been to make sure that the carriers that want to write workers' comp in New York have enough assets to basically insure the claims. And the second part of their responsibility, they, through law, have delegated to another major organization, which is the Compensation Insurance Rating Board. And the responsibility that they delegated was that of making sure of all the underwriting rules and following through and determining what the premium level should be. So that's what the Compensation Insurance Rating Board does. They're a nonprofit, they're funded by the insurance industry, and their major role is to determine what the classifications should be for all the different people. In other words, if you're, example, you're working in the state, well, what type of industry are you working in? Construction, mining, other types of occupations. So they break it down to that. So then they break it down further and they subdivide it into, okay, well, you're in construction. Well, what type of construction? Are you a plumber or a roofer? You know, and each one of those classifications have different degrees of hazardousness associated with it. And workers' comp is just like many other types of insurances. Your premiums, or your the amount that you pay for your insurance, is dependent upon how hazardous your rate is. So, and that's the next part of what the Compensation Insurance Rating Board does, is they then go through and have to determine for any employer that has more than $5,000 of annual premium, they have to go through and try and find out, okay, well, you're a roofer. Well, do you have a lot of accidents or do you have few accidents? If you've got a lot of accidents, you get surcharged. Just like if you have an auto insurance policy and you live down in New York City and you've had a lot of accidents and speeding tickets, you get surcharged. Well, the same thing happens with workers' compensation. Again, if you're a good employer and you don't have those type of accidents, then you get discounts. So that's your experience modification factor. So those are the two things that CIRB is really responsible for. Then you've got another group of players in the system. They're called the insurers. Now, you've got insurance carriers, you've got self-insured employers, and you've got group self-insurers.
And these are private companies.
In terms of your private companies, in terms of workers' compensation, insurance carriers, you have the State Insurance Fund, which is a public agency, and then you've got about 220 private insurance carriers that are currently writing workers' comp in New York State. In addition, you have big self-insured companies. Now, I know a lot of small companies want to become self-insured. The problem is, to be a full self-insurer in New York costs $664,000 right up front. Why? Because New York has unlimited liability if you're an employer. The carrier has to pay whatever the cost can be for as long as the claim is valid.
It almost seems to go a little bit against what insurance is all about. You want to spread the risk around. So if if you're taking on all of the risk as a small company,
That's
really
the reason
not
why. That's the reason why the reserves are required and why the reserves are so high. Because, you know, periodically, even your biggest companies become insolvent. And as a result of that, we have to have enough reserves basically banked to make sure that the people who were hurt while the company was solvent basically would pay their claims.
So you have to
for the
take
life
on
of those.
something if an insurance company goes down.
Exactly. And with the insurance carriers, again, their financial assets are monitored by the state insurance department. They're licensed by the insurance department, et cetera. There are certain special funds available in case insurance carriers become insolvent because they're businesses just like everyone else's. And again, so every once in a while, something happens to them as well.
It's a very complicated set of relationships, I guess, just like the law. I looked at the law, and there were 5 huge volumes. I started paging through, and some of the paragraphs I found impossible to read.
It's very interesting because in terms of the workers' compensation law, it came about back in 1914 as a mandatory insurance coverage. It's a social insurance program. The reason why the law was enacted was, if we go back about 3 years prior to that, there was a huge fire in New York City. It was a Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And basically 146 people lost their lives within 15 minutes. It was a sweatshop.
Wow.
The reason, it was a garment manufacturer. They had, you know, cloth line all over the place, and they wanted to make sure that they got a fair day's labor out of their people, and also make sure that no one stole anything. So what did they do? They locked all the doors, you know, which was great other than when a fire broke out. As I said, within 15 minutes, 146 people lost their lives. 136 of them were women. And if you read the newspaper accounts of the day, it was absolutely horrific. You know, these they gave very graphic accounts of how these people, you know, were killed. And as a result of that, there was such a public outcry that all of a sudden the governor and the legislature enacted all kinds of laws to make sure this never happened again. They passed the labor law, your building codes, your fire codes, and workers' compensation law all had their genesis as a result of that one fire.
That's amazing.
It was incredible. But again, New York is a political state. And I'm not telling any tales out of school,
Right.
you know, and this is the way it's always been. It's historically. And as a result of that, when they passed the workers' compensation law, it had to benefit both injured workers and their employers. How did it benefit injured workers? Well, they were supposed to be guaranteed prompt payment of their lost wages, up to 2/3 of the average weekly wage that's mandated in law. We're going to talk a little bit about the reform legislation and how that was increased. But the second part of it is unlimited medical benefits. If you're hurt on the job, no matter what it costs to get you as whole as possible, that's what the carriers are liable to pay in terms of getting people, trying to get them back to the workplace if at all possible, and if not, making sure that they're, you know, as medically comfortable as possible. When we talked about liability in New York, we're talking about unlimited liability in many cases. For example, first claim we had was a death case, happened the day the law became effective back in 1914. Bridge painter in the Hudson Valley fell to his death. His spouse started collecting benefits in 1914 and continued collecting death benefits until the 1990s when she passed away.
Wow.
That's a long time for paying benefits. But that's why you know, your workers' compensation premiums can be reflective of that cost, because again, people, when they're severely injured or you know, they're killed on the job, their dependents rely on the system to basically recover some of their loss.
When I first started delving into the subject for the program to do a little preparation, I took the laws and I quickly decided that while it was perhaps interesting, it was way too much for me. But then I went to some websites and some FAQs to just find some basic questions and answers. And I began to understand that this is really about moving things along also, as in no-fault auto insurance. We can't have people fighting over who's responsible when someone is hurt.
And that's where, if I can digress just for a
Please.
moment, let me mention first about the employer side, because again, this was the, you know, when workers' comp was enacted, you had to protect both sides. And what the employers gained as having workers' comp was that this was a no-fault system, whereby in the vast majority of cases, the injured worker would find workers' comp as their sole recourse against that employer in terms of obtaining the medical benefits and also attaining their lost wages. So basically it protected the employers from lawsuits. And this was a huge, huge benefit for employers. But that's the reason why workers' comp is so important, because it does benefit the needs of both the injured worker and the employer.
So it wraps up the liability insurance with the physical damage to repair injury, to redress injury, and to help people see themselves through that period.
Absolutely. In many cases, workers' comp is the insurance of first recourse, and a lot of people don't recognize that. Example, if you're working and you happen to be injured in an auto accident, before no fault kicks in, it's workers' compensation. If you've ever been injured in an accident, you go to the hospital, what's one of the first questions that they ask you? You know, was this work-related? Well, why do they care about that? Because as soon as you say it's work-related, that hospital or medical provider can't charge you a dime. Basically, all the costs for that have to come out of the workers' compensation system.
Okay. When I read through the law, one thing I did notice, and this may be almost silly, it boggled my mind. I'm reading and it said, who is under this? And instead of saying everybody, which would seem to be kind of simple, it started listing what I would say was 500 different types of jobs.
Yes.
Why is that, and is everybody under it?
That's where it starts. Okay, if you take a look at Section 2 of the Workers' Comp Law, if you ever can't sleep at night, great section to open up, you'll be asleep in seconds. Basically, it starts off with that. And then the law itself is very, very complex, and it's subject to interpretation. And that's the reason why, in many cases, there can be controversy out there as to whether or not, a simple question, whether or not somebody is or is not an employee under the workers' compensation law. You know, simple example, your firefighters, your policemen in New York City, they're not covered by New York workers' comp, they're covered by a separate system by the city of New York. But that's an example.
But they're covered.
But they're covered, all right. In most cases, there's parts of the workers' compensation law that list specific exclusions, and it could be very, very confusing for an employer. For an example, part of the law states that if you're a sole proprietor or partner of a partnership, one or two person-owned corporation, you're not required to be covered for workers' compensation in the corporation as long as you own all the stock, hold all the offices of that corporation, and you each have to have a share of stock if there's two stockholders. But the key thing is, those are exclusions, and if you have no other employees, you're not required to carry workers' comp. The key disconnect is that that works as long as you're working for yourself, by yourself. And this gets into the whole independent contractor situation. Because what happens is, everyone's independent until they're hurt on the job. Then all of a sudden, if you're providing services to another business, under the definition of employee under Section 2, it basically defines an employee as anyone providing any services to a for-profit business with very limited exclusions. They give 5 examples of specific examples for independent contractors. And again, if you don't fall into one of those, the law is silent in terms of any others.
I would think that most business managers or owners would know if somebody really is an employee or not. And while there's a benefit to saying that this person is really a contractor and not an employee, that would only, like you're saying, be a benefit until something happens.
Something happens, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I mean, I've gotten calls from grocery store owners who said their cashiers are independent contractors. Now, do they bring their own their cash register with them? Do they, take it home with them with all the cash in it? I don't think so.
Right.
Those are called employees. But again, this is how, back in the day, businesses had employees, if we're talking back in the 80s or before that. But starting in the mid-80s, going into the 90s, everybody became an independent contractor.
Now, a plumber might bring, in some cases, his tools.
Right, exactly. And there are certain criteria. One of the key things is, if you want to really see whether somebody is independent, take a look, are they bringing their own supplies and materials? Okay, a plumber can certainly be an independent contractor. If they're bringing their own supplies and materials, they're bringing their own plumbing things and everything else. If they're installing somebody else's stuff, all of a sudden that degree of independence is diminished. If they're working underneath somebody's operating permit, that degree of independence is diminished. If you're truly independent, you're working under your own permit, license, or contracting, with a government agency. If you don't have that and you're working underneath somebody else's operating authority, there's nothing really independent about you, and that's part of where the disconnect is coming in. A lot of times people hope that the people that they're using are independent contractors. Example, I had a call from a mother whose son was injured the first day he started work. He was working for a siding company, and the boss told him, yep, you're an independent contractor. Well, guess what? The son got seriously disabled because he fell off the ladder, and this was the first day he was working. And again, now that employer, because the employer did not have workers' compensation, is going to be subject to not only potential no insurance claim, if he has a lot of assets, that injured worker can choose to sue him. If you have a workers' comp policy, normally that will protect you against lawsuits in many, many cases. But if you don't have a workers' compensation policy, you're certainly subject to being sued.
Now, I would think most of the cases where people say that somebody is an independent contractor when it's a gray area would be because they want to avoid paying into the fund or to
not only
getting their
workers' comp,
insurance.
but for taxes, for Department of Labor Unemployment Insurance. There's a whole host of reasons why people would claim somebody would be independent.
But if they really don't know, it would not be a bad idea not to ask someone.
Absolutely, they should check out the board's website. The board's website, and we'll give the web address later, but it basically has some very excellent information on who isn't required to have a workers' compensation insurance policy. And a lot of times employers will say, well, geez, the IRS said that I'm an independent, or my employees are independent contractors, or the people that I hire. And the reality is workers' compensation law, labor law for unemployment insurance, and the IRS have totally different rules as to who is and who isn't an employee. The workers' comp law in New York is the most stringent, and that's part of the difficulty. If somebody gets hurt, it's up to our workers' comp law judges, once a claim is filed, to determine whether or not a claim is compensable or not. If they find an employer-employee relationship, then that employer is liable to pay the claim. If they don't have a workers' compensation policy, they're going to be personally liable, and a lot of business owners don't understand this. If they are sole proprietor, partner of a partnership, generally they know that they're responsible for everything their business does. But the ones who are really surprised are the president, secretary, and treasurer of a corporation, because the law states that they are also personally liable. Once we liquidate corporate assets, we then can go after them for their personal assets. And they, in many cases, are totally clueless on that because, hey, that's why their attorneys inform them to form a corporation to protect their corporate assets. But workers' comp is one of the only laws that pierces that corporate veil.
Now, if I were a worker and I were going to apply for a job with a company, would that be a fair question? Maybe a stupid question if you're worried about not getting the job, but would that be a smart question to ask? If this company recognizes
provides workers' compensation, insurance, etc. It certainly wouldn't be a bad question to ask, especially, and this is where one of the difficulties comes in with, being a person in the labor force as to being an employer. In many cases, the person is just looking for a job, and not even thinking about benefits or what happens if. It's just like anything else. They're hoping that nothing ever happens, and that's one of the last questions that people will ask.
Especially a roofing company. I mean, if you're going to do that.
Exactly. And, and very honestly, we have had the roofers come in and say, well, yeah, all the guys that are working for me are independent contractors. Again, if you're installing someone else's shingles, there's nothing independent about you. You're a labor force for that company. But this is why a lot of businesses historically have had difficulty with the, with workers' comp and understanding the fact that, yeah, under the workers' comp law, they are considered an employer and they really do need to have coverage. And this really does protect them.
Before we move into another area, I just wanted to kind of give us a chance to sum up how this works. In case, what do people maybe not understand about workers' comp? Or how does the system work?
Okay, if you're an injured worker, basically if you get hurt on the job, it's the employer's responsibility to file a form called the C2 form, which is the employer's report of accident. The injured worker can also file a form notifying the board that, yes, they have an accident, and that's certainly something that's recommended. If our advocate for injured worker were here, he'd say, hey, if you're hurt on the job, file a C3 form. Basically, the C3 form is the employee's report that something happened on the job, that they were hurt on the job, etc. And what it does is allow the board to have a file indicating that something happened, and they will monitor it.
So it's a little bit like an accident report if you're in your car.
Absolutely. And then what happens after that is the board will keep track of that. There'll be something called the C4 form, which is filed by the health providers. Why? Because when people are hurt, they're usually seeking medical treatment, and the C4 form is the report of the treating physician or health provider saying that, hey, we provided services to this injured worker, this is the extent of them, and providing more medical information.
Okay. Now, let's get down to a little deeper level, and
Sure.
I guess one basic question that I almost have to ask, New York is considered to be a very high expense state in which to do business, and workers' comp has in the past been cited as one of the top priorities for the chambers of commerce to get lowered. I guess I want to ask, is it as high as it looks? Because many times statistics lie a little bit. For example, Mississippi doesn't have a very high standard of living. Their average wage is certainly much lower than New York. So we have to compare states that are similar with states that are similar. So with that in mind, how are we higher or lower?
Basically, what I tell employers to do, especially out-of-state employers that are looking to relocate into New York, is when we mention the rating codes, the Compensation Insurance Rating Board is the one that promulgates them. That basically, they create something called the manual rate. That's your starting point for workers' compensation. And it's broken out according to classifications and categories and things of that nature. But the employer has to go deeper than that. They have to shop around. Workers' comp is the same thing as getting many other types of insurance. You have to shop around because, in this case, workers' comp is workers' comp is workers' comp. You're going to get the same benefit package. You may get certain different levels of how should I say, enhanced safety programs or something like that by going from one carrier to another. But this is something where an employer really has to shop around, take a look at the type of business that they have, see what the real good fit is for your business, and which carrier is going to provide the lowest cost for providing that benefit. New York is a competitive state for workers' compensation insurance. We do have 220 insurance carriers writing the coverage. They can get it from the private side or they can get it from the state insurance fund. They should shop around. But in many cases, for example, you can't go with just the manual rate because you have to take a look at, well, what other discounts are the carriers going to offer? Do you pay your bills on time? If so, you're going to get a discount. Do you write all your lines of insurance with the same insurance company? If you do, guess what? You'll get a discount. So your final cost for workers' comp may be less than what is being initially quoted by looking at the manual rate. So the thing is, shop around, and that should give you a
So some
good
companies,
rate.
depending on what the people do and their track record, may be better off going in than just saying, okay, this is the average, the state's high.
Exactly. Exactly. They can get significant discounts again, or it may be possible because they've had a high experience modification where they've had a lot of accidents where they are going to pay more than other employers. But again, this is the same thing as you'd find in an auto insurance policy. You got to shop around with different carriers, and gee, one carrier may give you a great rate and another one may give you a higher rate. But again, you've got to take a look at the total package. You shop different carriers and you see what your best cost rate is. The key thing is the new 2007 reform legislation that was recently enacted by Governor Spitzer and the legislature. I mean, it was an incredible benefit for both injured workers and the employers. In terms of the employers, it's going to result in a 20.5% discount over the premium costs for your average employer in New York State. This is huge.
That's a big reduction. Yeah.
It's going to save over $1 billion to the employers initially. There's other plans in place right now to keep the cap on that, possibly reduce it even further.
I know it wasn't in the beginning even projected to save that much. Wasn't it in the neighborhood of 12%?
Well, again, the reason why the workers, the legislation, it was very, very comprehensive. I've been involved in the system for over a quarter century, and I've never seen anything this comprehensive for the workers' compensation law reform. I mean, 71 pages, single-spaced. I mean, there's a lot of information in there. One of the key things it does for injured workers is it finally raises the benefit level in terms of the average weekly wage amount. Now, if you're injured on the job, the maximum benefit is raised from $400 a week, which had been for over a decade, up to $500 as of this last July 1st.
Looks like a 20%. It worked out right there.
Next July 1st, it goes
25,
up.
excuse me.
Yep. Next July 1st, it goes up to $550. July 1st after that, $600. And by the way, this is for claims happening on or after those dates. And effective July 1st, 2010, it goes up to the average weekly wage of New York State, whatever that is determined by the Department of Labor. This is an incredible benefit for labor because now they don't have to keep going back to the governor or the legislature saying, Mother, may I have an increase?
So it's indexed.
It's going to be indexed for inflation. I mean, this is a huge benefit for labor. In addition, labor also got enhanced medical, expediting the medical treatment, and they also received the additional benefit of basically being able to use this next benefit is actually for both employers and the injured workers, being able to go to preferred provider organizations, which will really expedite their medical treatment.
So in other words, the same kind of places that they might go otherwise.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and that's a cost benefit to employers, a cost savings, but to the injured workers, at least all the reports that we've had so far from companies that have been using this have been extremely positive. The injured workers are very pleased with the level of care that they're getting. They usually have a case manager on them, which is coordinating their medical treatment. So as opposed to going out on your own and trying to find doctors and everything else who are willing to take care of the medical fee schedule or make the payment or accept the dollar amount from the medical fee schedule, this is all taken care of for them. So it's a real benefit on both sides.
Now, I may have forgotten something already. There was the pay.
Mm-hmm.
That's up. The medical benefits, they're faster and better.
Yep.
And you can use your own provider.
The third one that's going to come through is the fact that the cases and controverted cases, those claims are going to be heard much faster. The legislation basically requires that if somebody is injured on the job and the carrier controverts the claim, meaning the carrier has a problem, for whatever reason they don't think that that they were an employee or some other reason why the carrier disputes the claim, now the board will have to hear the case within 45 days after we receive the first medical confirming information.
So how soon would you get a judgment? The 45 days?
Well, no. After that, then the case is going to basically they're setting up the rules right now with the insurance department, and all this should be forthcoming very shortly.
So we have to wait a little bit on that.
We have to wait a little bit further.
Now, what did the companies get?
In terms of the employers, I mean, the big thing is that 20.5% discount.
That's a
which is huge.
Good start, yeah.
Which is huge. Also got the advantage of many of them being able to participate with these PPO organizations. There's now a medical fee schedule in terms of pharmaceutical care and other types of medical fee schedules, which again are intended to lower the cost. One of the other key ways of keeping the cost down is making sure every employer in the state that's required to have workers' comp actually has it.
Because you're going to end up responsible anyway.
Exactly. And the other part of it is the more people that pay into the system, the lower the cost is.
Right.
In other words, we've got a certain fixed number of claims out there. All right. And again, the more people that actually contribute to paying those claims, the lower each one has to pay. Now, in terms of the reform legislation, they have given the Workers' Compensation Board a lot of tools and a lot of teeth to enforce the mandatory coverage provisions. The penalty...
And that was also in the Reform Act.
This was absolutely part of the reform legislation. Again, it was so comprehensive because they did take a look at so many different pieces of it to make the whole thing make sense. For the penalties, the penalty for noncompliance was increased fourfold. It used to be $250 for each 10 days that you didn't have coverage. It's been increased to $1,000, but it doesn't stop there. If you've got 5 or less employees working for you and you don't have coverage, that's a misdemeanor.
And that's whether anything happens or not.
Right, exactly. It's a misdemeanor, and there's up to an additional $5,000 penalty for that. If you've got 6 or more people working for you, it is now a felony if you don't have workers'
That means
compensation
jail time.
insurance. Well,
Possibly.
it's a huge penalty. On top of that, up to $50,000 on top of any other penalties and fines.
Which is probably more likely. Right?
Which is more likely, absolutely. Now, let's continue. If you tell somebody that you have workers' comp and you submit a certificate of insurance saying that you had workers' comp and you didn't have it, or you give a government agency a form saying that you're exempt from workers' comp because you have no employees and you really do, now that's a felony that has 4 years of jail associated with it.
Wow.
And that, and unfortunately, for that employer, we do prosecute those cases. I was asked to testify by the U.S. Attorney General in a claim, and basically the employer had indicated that they had coverage, they had none, and we basically went through, and the individual ended up with 15 years of jail time, 4 of which was workers' compensation fraud. So it is something that, if the employers, if you have employees, we strongly recommend that you get a policy in place, because again, the penalties and fines out there are an extreme deterrent. And if you're a big company, let's say you're a huge corporation, you've got like a $20 million a year policy, all right, and you don't have workers' compensation, we can charge double the amount of what you would pay as your premium. Richard, one of the key points that the employers also received as a benefit was the fact that now permanent partial disabilities will be capped. In other words, before, if you were partially disabled, an example, you were only 20% disabled, you would be able to receive benefits depending on the type of injury forever. And now, with the new legislation, there is a time period for capping that disability where somebody could be paid up to a certain number of years. And the maximum amount is up to 10 years for permanent partial disability. At the expiration of that 10-year period, people can once again, if they're severely disabled, 80% or more disabled, they'll be able to go to the Department of Labor commissioner and see whether the labor commissioner would be able to file a financial hardship in their favor, which would allow them to continue benefits. But that will only be on a very exceptional basis. For the most part, injured workers, if they are partially disabled, will now have a cap on the number of years that they're able to get benefits.
Okay. We're getting close to wrapping up,
Okay.
but before we do, want to just go into that fraud part just a little bit, and then we can wrap up.
Sure.
Is fraud one of the reasons why workers' comp is more expensive, and is it still extensive?
It certainly is, and the Workers' Comp Board is clamping down on it. The new law gives us the ability to issue something called a stop work order, which means we can shut a business down. Right now, we have used this tool very judiciously in cases where we've had no insurance claims. The law judge has already ruled that, hey, they're in non-compliance and they haven't gotten a policy yet. So, but over time, the board will be using this as a very effective tool. Again, we don't want to use it, without a lot of thought. I mean, again, shutting down a business is a huge undertaking,
Right.
and it is something that we will only reserve for those cases that really, aren't necessary, or there's an extremely hazardous situation going on, and we don't want anyone getting hurt on it without having the appropriate coverage.
Now, all this is complicated to kind of wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
What can people do if they're not quite sure what to do?
Okay, take a look at the board's website. Okay, and I'll give you the website addresses at www.wcb, as in Workers' Comp Board, .state.ny as in New York, .us as in United States. And then once you're on that website, you can either go under injured worker or under employers and take a look at what's appropriate to you. That's a starting point. Certainly you can check with your paid professional in terms of, especially for employers, they could check with their CPAs or accountants, they can check with their attorneys as to the workers' compensation requirements. We're trying to go out and educate and provide services to those professional organizations to make sure all their members are aware of the workers' compensation law, because as we discussed, it is so complex. So there are ways that people can certainly work with us to try and get the information. One of the key things is if you have business organizations and they'd like a presentation on workers' comp, they can certainly call my office and we'll be able to set something up for that. My office.
What's your phone number? Yeah.
Yeah, my phone number is area code 518-486-6307. And this way, if they have an organization they'd like us to come out and do a presentation to them, we'd love to do it and educate the employers or the accountants, etc.
Well, you were certainly very obliging to come on our show and talk about a subject that's very important, but certainly not it can't compete with baseball, and it can't compete with some of the fun things we do.
But it's one of the most important in terms of if you are an employer, you really do need to have that workers' comp coverage in place. If you're an injured worker, certainly give the workers' compensation board a call, and again, check out our website. That'll provide you with all the contact phone numbers.
Really not an option.
No, not an option to go without the coverage.
Right. So I want to thank you, Steve, for being on the show.
Richard, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us.
And I want to thank everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show, and hope you watch the next show. Take care and have a great week. Bye.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.